Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third annual MysTech Conference 2020. And what a year this has been so far. My name is Frank Downhauer, and I am the Managing Director for the Center for Anthroposophical Endeavors, CFAE. I will be one of the hosts for this conference. Your other host will be none other than Andrew Linnell. I will be introducing Andrew a little later in the session. But for MysTech and myself, both Andrew and I had co-founded MysTech at the end of 2016. At that time, I had just taken on the mantle of managing director of the nonprofit CFAE, the Rudolf Steiner Bookstore and Threefold Publishing. My taking on this position with CFAE was very much the alignment of the stars, believe me. And coming after the passing of my mother a year before, who carried CFAE for over 30 years. After her passing, I felt pressed upon to do two things: establish a universal method of threefolding for all, and the other, for which we are here today, establish an organization that could be central meeting place here in the West for the mysteries of science and technology that all could participate and find as a wellspring for now and the future. Both of these tasks were far too big for me to accomplish on my own, but to my better nature, I did take on the easiest of the two tasks. Thanks to my meeting with Andrew Linnell, we were to embark on a journey that has so far led us here today. As for the first task, you can see what we're planning by going to cfae.us/endeavors. As for MysTech, it now has a website of its own, of which you all are a part of. It is in its fourth year of a 2 9-week study course in the understanding of a technology from a spiritual scientific perspective, and its 7th edition of the MysTech Journal. We have had supporters of the organization from the very start joining us as members and pledging their support on a yearly basis. If we had time, which I'm running out, I would acknowledge them personally, but you know who you are, and we thank you. We also wholeheartedly thank the many who have chosen to support us annually along with their attendance of this conference. Thank you very much. Our core MysTech group has also grown with two others that have taken on the care of MysTech's future: Doug Smith and Evan Folds, both of whom were instrumental in putting together this conference. Thank you, Doug, and thank you, Evan. As this is our third annual conference, it would be correct to think we had two others that preceded this one. This first one was in 2018. We had 12 attend. Both the past conferences were at Rudolf Steiner House in Ann Arbor. We gather this time online due to the pandemic. Because we will confer online, we have opened up our conference to attendees from around the world to participate with us as we explore some critical themes of our time. The importance of this conference can be found in Rudolf Steiner's own words, and I quote, "The will is there to harness human energy to mechanical energy. These things should not be treated by fighting against them. That is a completely false view. These things will not fail to appear. They will come. What we are concerned with is whether in the course of world history, they are entrusted to people who are familiar in a selfless way with a great aim of earthly evolution and who structure these things for the health of human beings, or whether they are enacted by groups of human beings who exploit these things in an egotistical or in a group egotistical sense. That is what matters. It is not a question of what in this case. The what is sure to come. It is a question of how one tackles these situations. The what lies simply in the meaning of Earth evolution, the welding together of the human nature with the mechanical nature will be a problem of great significance for the remainder of earthly evolution. Our MysTech conference is a serious endeavor towards the right and true realization of the how for the what, and is core to the mission of MysTech itself. With that said, and in ending, I want to thank some who have worked tirelessly behind the scenes to build this conference platform we are now using. Byron Fabrizio Lanier and Dana Alvarez of Ninja Digital. We consider them friends as well as partners in this endeavor and have been a tour de force in building this site, something that is truly unique. Thank you both. Because we are online, we cannot offer as much interaction as there would be in person, but our hope is that you will find the technology of the live chat and the social platform embedded in each of the session pages an acceptable substitute for interacting with each of the speakers and their presentation. Please use these tools to ask questions or speak your mind. We encourage you to do this freely and thank you in advance for your active participation. As you know, we have filled our conference with 20 amazing speakers. They come from Waldorf education, biodynamic agriculture, biotech, big tech, business, and various other industries. I want to end here with the most sincere and heartfelt thank you to all our presenters who have given of themselves and their time to be here with you and MysTech. MysTech's purpose is to be here and support all of you. Our hope is that we should fulfill that purpose. And now I would like to introduce to you our keynote speaker, Ed Conroy. Now, Ed and I have been friends for years now, and we have had many deep conversations on many topics. I know this of Ed for sure. He loves the sea and tall ships, both of which you will find reference to in his keynote today, but I digress. Ed Conroy in 1989, at the age of 36, became known nationally and internationally for a book that dealt with stories of adventures on ships of a different kind. I refer, of course, to his report on communion, in which he detailed the discoveries he made over the course of year investigation into the life and work of Whitney Strieber. In 1987, Strieber's book, Communion, A True Story, had become an overnight publishing sensation, hovering for months or at near top of the New York Times nonfiction bestseller list, becoming the best-selling UFO-related book of the 20th century. At the time, Ed was an art writer, critic, and urban affairs columnist for the San Antonio Express News of San Antonio, Texas, the city in which both he and Strieber was born. He brought to his newspaper work his background in studying the history and criticism of art from the School of Critical Studies at California Institute of the Arts, and his studies in the Spanish language and history, literature, art, and culture of Mexico at the National Autonomous University of Mexico. As he is bilingual and bicultural, he specialized in interviewing and profiling major Mexican artists who frequently visited San Antonio, as well as developing Latino artistic life of his own city, intending to reach across the border and make them a little less alien to his readers. In deciding to write a book-length profile of Strieber, he likewise saw himself reaching across a border, the border between the visible and invisible worlds. to make Strieber and his experience more intelligible to his readers. He was fortunate to bring to his work of investigating the most famous UFO-related story of his time, the training he gave himself in the 1970s as a student at the San Francisco Zen Center and as a student of Chinese martial arts. He was also fortunate to have received an introduction to Rosicrucian thought and the extent of alchemy, astrology, and the Holy Cabal under the instruction of Albert Riddell, known as Frater Albertus, at the Perculus College in Salt Lake City, Utah. He has also read widely in the literature of anthroposophy after inspirational meeting with the late Rene Corrido in San Francisco in the 1970s. He later pursued his studies in the Western Hermetic tradition over the last 3 decades as a member of the Builder of Editum, founded by the late Paul Foster Case. For the last 3 decades, Ed has applied himself to his second vocation as Chief Development Officer for several nonprofit organizations in San Antonio, including the San Antonio Symphony, and for the last 22 years, Southwest School of Art, Texas's only independent college of art. In his spare time of late, he has been serving as a consultant to film directors and writers Josh Boone and Sean Stone, who are creating the pilot for a 10-part FX television series dramatizing the life of Whitney Strieber and Ed's own life in the late 1980s when he conducted his year-long investigation. Ed is also the proud father of Bridget Conroy, who recently graduated from Harvard Divinity School. We are very pleased to have you with us, Ed. Welcome.
Thank you, Frank, and hello to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. All of us gathered here today at the opening of the MysTech 2020 conference are about to embark on a journey, a voyage into uncharted seas. Our shared intention is to explore the unfolding relationship of humanity with rapidly changing technology in the light of spiritual science. Like explorers of old, we are on a quest to make known the unknown and bring back into our lives wisdom, understanding, and tools that we may share with others to help us adapt to the shifting sands, coastlines, and atmospheres, both physical and etheric, of our native countries. I see our journey today, then, in the light of the tradition of the Imram, the Celtic journey to the other world, a voyage across the sea to the Isles of the Blessed, where great spiritual gifts may be sought and received, where we may encounter the spirits of our ancestors and guides from higher realms. Yet, while the waters of the sea are the source of all life, the sea is dangerous, and to cross it, one must trust entirely in the divine and do so with love. A Celtic folk song quoted by Caitlin Matthews in her beautifully written Celtic Book of the Dead expresses this theme. The sea is wide, I cannot cross o'er, and neither have I wings to fly. Bring me a boat that can carry 2, and I will sail my love to you. In Ireland and other Celtic lands, the Imram journeys were undertaken at times of crisis, when sailors greatly needed spiritual rebirth, regeneration, and transformation, and even at the point of death. We undertake our journey today sharing the recognition we are all in need of rebirth, regeneration, and transformation. We find ourselves at a crossroads, for our world is in peril, both spiritually and materially. The wisdom, understanding, and new tools we seek are needed for our very survival. Our ship for this conference is the internet, the World Wide Web, which we each embark upon through the portals of our computers. We trust and pray there will be no storms during the days of our upcoming quest, and that the wind will be at our backs. I am honored and thankful to be here with you at the outset of this journey, to strike a few keys and perhaps play some chords that may open our hearts and minds to the extraordinary array of presentations our speakers have prepared for us. It has long been customary for sailors of all nations to request permission to come aboard a ship. I ask you then to please join with me in collectively saluting and thanking the captains and officers of our ship, who are our conference organizers and presenters, and the many other people who have made this possible. And also, I salute our invisible captains who are with us in spirit and request their blessing on our presence here today, together as the crew. Yes, we are all the crew on this ship and none of us merely passengers. I have no doubt that each of us will do our part to keep our ship on course with the power of our focused attention, perhaps as Rudolf Steiner encouraged aspirants to do. We may hear the rustlings of spirit in our souls as we actively listen to the voices of our speakers in this conference. Each of us here today has already embarked on our own journeys to acquire and ethically utilize knowledge and wisdom not always valued by society's dominant institutions. I therefore salute and honor each of you for the efforts you have made to serve as pioneers of new knowledge. May we be good and faithful witnesses to what we learn here and when we return to our respective local communities. It will not be easy, for we are living in extraordinary times of extravagant political polarization, where everything seems to be seen as either good or bad, right or left, with no room for a third way that attempts to mediate between extremes. We live in a time when truth itself is under attack, in which the practice of disseminating disinformation via all communications media, and especially on the internet, has risen to a high, well-paid art and science. The big lie, perfected in Nazi Germany, has been utilized for decades by governments of all political stripes for their increasingly totalitarian and authoritarian agendas, which are likewise increasingly held in suspicion by people around the globe. One does not need to adhere to belief in any so-called conspiracy theory to arrive at such a conclusion, for signs of such impulses are evident in plain sight everywhere around us in every sphere of human life. At this conference, we gather in a spirit of cooperation that refuses to be caught in the double binds of dualistic thinking. We assert we can apply ourselves in original ways to the service of human evolution, adapting the insights that come from the spiritual scientific way of thinking to the challenges of our times, which are indeed many. The advent of artificial intelligence, facilitated by the installation of 5G transmission systems throughout the world and the coming Internet of Things, the ionization of our atmosphere by global spraying of metallic oxides and other toxic substances, the pollution of our food, soil, and water by agricultural practices that utilize genetically modified organisms dependent upon artificial fertilizers and cancer-causing glyphosate-based insecticides, the integration of education itself with computer-based forms of behavior control, combined with ever more sophisticated forms of electronic and digital surveillance and social credit systems, militates to create a world in which the free exercise of the human spirit is made more difficult every day. We are here to meet those challenges with courage and intelligence and with the full strength of our hearts, bodies, and minds. We will need such strength, intelligence, and courage, for we are also living in a world where all political ideologies and the economic systems associated with them have worn themselves out, having clearly failed to deliver on the false promises they originally offered to the people at large to justify their injustices. Capitalism, socialism, fascism, and communism, in all their various forms, have revealed themselves to be dependent upon a state of perpetual war, on systematic deception, on various forms of slavery and exploitation of not only people, but of nature herself. To ensure social cohesion, they have all utilized various forms of mind control, from Chinese communist re-education, currently being practiced upon the Islamic Uyghur peoples, to the advertising arts of Madison Avenue, now transferred to Silicon Valley, in which our tastes and likes are calculated by algorithms that anticipate our every desire. It is now business as usual for movements for democracy and public political protests to be misrepresented in many media outlets, and when not favored by the authorities, to be disrupted by forces highly skilled in taking down dissent. Need I mention, moreover, that the world's mainline religions, suffering from scandals, are losing ground to fundamentalisms of every stripe, with all their attendant forms of violence and dark apocalyptic visions of the future. In this time of great angst, disruption, and alienation, in which the world's economies and international travel have largely ground to a halt with far-reaching repercussions, we do well to take hope from drinking waters of inspiration freely given to humanity by Rudolf Steiner and the many other thinkers who, over the past century, have applied the spiritual science he initiated to such practical realms as the holistic education of children, the reform of agriculture towards the production of more nutritious foods, the reform of an overly materialistic medicine, and to the creation of new artistic enterprises. Perhaps new creative and regenerative movements inspired by spiritual science will come from those of us here today. It is vitally important for us to recognize the significance of the clear declarations Rudolf Steiner made that knowledge of higher worlds was possible for all human beings who are willing, with discipline and humility, to apply themselves to the educational process of probation, enlightenment, and initiation, which will bring the aspiring human being into a state of integration with nothing less than the cosmos in which we live and move and have our being. Steiner also taught, through his many public lectures and writings, that human consciousness and our very souls are in the process of evolving over millennia, from early states of what he called atavistic clairvoyance to ever higher levels of consciousness involving the development of our powers of perception and discrimination. Moreover, he emphasized the importance of growing into personal and spiritual maturity through successfully encountering the challenges of being, he called, the dweller on the threshold, who requires the aspirant to confront his or her remaining flaws and overcome them before being admitted into the higher realms. While Steiner emphasized individual responsibility, he also recognized the need for a reform of the social order so that humanity might grow in a spirit of brotherly and sisterly cooperation and love toward new social conditions in which the full potential of our humanity will be able to develop. Steiner therefore enunciated his vision of a future threefold social order that, we must remember, was born in the bloody crucible of the First World War, a total war in which more than 20 million people died and 20 million were wounded. In the wake of that devastation, Steiner advocated for a new social contract in which society would be organized into three distinct but cooperating social spheres. He called those spheres the economic, the legal, and the cultural. He further advocated that they should be organized as autonomous, independent social organisms committed to cooperation through a legislative process, but committed as well to preserving their respective boundaries. In such a manner, he asserted human energies and intelligence could be harnessed toward the advancement of our evolution, not as a utopia, but as a society in which inevitable conflicts and changing conditions could be dealt with creatively and harmoniously. Anyone reading Steiner on the subject of the threefold social order in our times, in which the political sphere is completely interpenetrated by lobbyists, in which there are countless revolving doors between high political offices and the corner offices of corporate leadership, in which the cultural sphere itself is constantly corrupted by commercial impulses, may be inclined to think that Steiner was living in a Rosicrucian ivory tower, divorced from the conflicts of his time and unaware of the complexities of the competing ideologies of his day. In fact, nothing could be farther from the truth. Steiner, though coming from a middle-class background, had been employed as a lecturer at a factory where he became personally acquainted with many working people interested in educating themselves. He sympathized greatly with their condition of being tied day by day to the tending of machines and their alienation from the products of their labor. He was fully familiar with Marxist thinking, then animating the struggles of workers throughout the industrial world, and he critiqued Marxist social thought for its dogmatic materialism. He heard as well the initial drumbeats of National Socialism, under which the German people marched into the Second World War with unimaginably tragic and horrific consequences for millions of people from which we are still healing. Most of all, he recognized that impulses toward totalitarianism were inherently dehumanizing, leading ultimately to a state of spiritual enslavement, which he described as the greatest damage and danger to humanity in our era. It is far outside the scope of my address to describe the ways in which the concept of social threefolding may be of relevance to our times. Other speakers in this conference will explore the concept in depth, and I am sure we will learn much from them. I believe it is appropriate for me to observe, however, that given the current extraordinary state of social and economic suspension in which we find ourselves, we have a unique opportunity to reflect upon the ways in which we may build the social threefolding impulse in our own respective spheres of life and in our own communities. Such activities will be reflections of the forces for freedom in our world that have the potential to help us utilize the very technologies now in danger of enslaving us for the advancement of our freedom and harmonious development. Let us resolve to understand and take hold of such technologies. Let us adapt them for the evolution of our consciousness toward higher realms and the development of the powers latent in each of us. Like drops of rainwater that disturb a placid pond and send ripples out to its very edges, the lectures, writings, and many other activities of Rudolf Steiner have undoubtedly stimulated the forces of freedom in our world, which he identified, of course, with the love of the cosmic etheric Christ, aided by angelic hosts who are here to help mankind, if only we choose to ask for their help. Let us remember and give homage, then, to the people who have joined in movements over the past century and in the first 2 decades of this century, promoting human liberation and freedom in so many ways. Many of us have participated in such movements for civil rights for people of all kinds, against war, to preserve nature herself, and then there are many others springing up in our own times. I have played a part, it so happens, in one such movement, which, in my opinion, is of increasing relevance to all of us concerned about new technologies and their moral use. I refer to what is coming to be called the disclosure movement. The term disclosure means different things to different people, and rightly so. The common usage of the term, of course, refers to the demand by many people, including many retired officers in the armed forces and intelligence services of the United States and other countries, that the governments of the world admit that humanity is in contact with non-human beings commonly called by the problematic term aliens, perhaps from here on Earth, perhaps from other places. The importance of such contacts, it is said, is related to stories that such beings have transferred to human beings their extraordinary technologies involving flight, weaponry, healing, and energy. Moreover, an idea complex may now be commonly found in the UFO literature and the vast world of YouTube videos, to the effect that such entities may be involved in abducting and breeding human-alien hybrid beings, and that contacts with such beings are deeply woven into the tapestry of human history. The concept that high technology transfers between so-called aliens and humans have taken place, and that they have come into widespread public use, has been in the public sphere at least from 1997, with the publication of the late Philip J. Corso's groundbreaking book, The Day After Roswell. In that book, he stated that he had overseen an official U.S. Air Force program to disseminate to American industries high technologies derived from alien artifacts retrieved from the famous 1947 vehicle crash in Roswell, New Mexico. He cited such technologies as integrated circuit chips, lasers, supertenacity fibers, and fiber optic cable, among others. Unfortunately, he bravely faced more than his share of ridicule and bad reporting in the media, and the potential impact of his message, if true, was totally lost. The idea that we are learning from so-called alien technologies has taken a few leaps in recent years, however, thanks to work led in a traditionally male-dominated field by 2 very remarkable women. Journalist Leslie Kean is one of them. She is the author of the book UFOs, Generals, Pilots, and Government Officials Go on the Record, and built on her years of developing contacts in the U.S. defense establishment to team up with Ralph Blumenthal and Helene Cooper to write an article headlined, quote, "Glowing Auras and Black Money, the Pentagon's Mysterious UFO Program," published in the New York Times on December 16, 2017. That story reported how Robert Bigelow, a billionaire aerospace engineer whose company Bigelow Aerospace makes equipment for the space station, had been conducting UFO-related research with $22 million in funding from a Pentagon-administered program, thanks to the legislative advocacy of former U.S. Senator from Nevada, Harry Reid, and others. Accompanied in its online version by video of what our military now calls a UAP, for unidentified aerial phenomenon, taken by Navy pilots, that article went viral and was one of the most read stories in the New York Times in the year 2017. Since that time, Kean and Blumenthal have written other remarkable UFO-related stories for the Times that are likewise essential reading. The other remarkable woman who has recently been making waves, writing about apparent alien-human technology transfers, is Dr. Diana Walsh-Pasulka, who serves as the chair of the Department of Philosophy and Religion at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. Pasulka is the author of American Cosmic UFOs, Technology, Religion, a book published in 2019 by Oxford University Press. In her book, she describes a journey she takes blindfolded to a place she calls the donation site, somewhere in the American Southwest, together with a gentleman whom she refers to simply as Tyler, and another gentleman, a distinguished materials scientist, for the purpose of searching for materials from crashed anomalous vehicles. Tyler, whom Pasulka describes as having worked for NASA and aerospace contractors for decades, is also described as a man who receives downloads of information from higher sources of consciousness, which he utilizes in his studies of such anomalous materials. In the course of the book, Pasulka takes her experience searching for such materials, and yes, they do find some, as a springboard for an extended examination of the ways in which the belief in the existence of UFOs and their high technologies has permeated not only popular culture, but also now certain elites within the field of scientific research and technological development. It is, I suggest, a highly significant book, and I am grateful it has been reviewed by Ann Nicholson in the MysTech Journal. Pasulka's work may be seen as part of an opening up of discourse about the UFO phenomenon and the people who are witnesses to it in academia, a movement she co-leads in concert with Dr. Jeffrey J. Kripal, the J. Newton Razor Professor of Religion at Rice University. Dr. Kripal is the author of numerous books that explore the work of people whom he calls authors of the impossible. He joined with Whitley Strieber, whose early work I have examined in detail, in writing The Supernatural, a New Vision of the Unexplained. He and Pasulka are educating a whole new generation of scholars of religion who will have an unprecedented education in the literature of paranormal phenomena and esotericism to bring to the study of religion during their careers. They also conduct a yearly symposium at Esalen Institute in Big Sur, California, on the nature of human consciousness in relationship to various fields of inquiry. I am grateful I was invited to attend the Esalen Symposium on Consciousness, UFOs, and Retrocausation, yes, retrocausation, in January of 2019, at which time I delivered a paper in which I conveyed the key things I learned from writing my book about Whitley Strieber, Report on Communion. In that book, I recounted the results of my investigation into Strieber's life and work prior to writing his 1987 blockbuster, Communion, A True Story. In that book, he describes his experiences with intelligent, apparently non-human beings who abducted him into a floating ovoid craft from his weekend home in the Hudson River Valley on the night of December 26, 1985. I was intrigued by Whitley Strieber because from the outset, he assumed a posture of radical questioning of every aspect of his experience and indeed of the so-called UFO phenomenon itself. Such an approach I found refreshing in contrast to much earlier UFO-related literature, characterized by very questionable assertions, exaggerated claims, and even outright deceptions. Indeed, Strieber refused to call the beings he encountered by the loaded terms of aliens or extraterrestrials. Rather, he preferred to call them simply his visitors, a term he uses to this day. Strieber was not by any means the only writer in the 1980s recounting stories of what the media came to call alien abduction. The late Bud Hopkins, a noted visual artist, was also researching and writing about the encounters of ordinary people with beings whom he did choose to call aliens. So too was Dr. David Jacobs, now retired from his position as an associate professor of history at Temple University. Both Hopkins and Jacobs had a rather dim view of the intention of their aliens. It was Strieber, however, who captured the attention of and the imagination of the American public, largely due, in my opinion, to the very articulate and unassuming manner in which he described his experiences to major talk show hosts such as Larry King and Phil Donahue. When those figures started listening to him seriously, so too did millions of other people, opening the floodgates to countless discussions of such experiences, both private and public, around the world. As Communion became the best-selling UFO-related book of the 20th century, Whitley and his late wife, Ann, began receiving thousands of letters from readers, many of whom recounted their own anomalous experiences with extraordinary beings. His book also catalyzed the very successful television series, The X-Files, which had a major impact on shaping popular culture around the concept that the truth about humanity's relationship with unseen beings and forces is being hidden, but nevertheless out there. I think Strieber would maintain, however, that while many secrets are indeed out there, each of us has the capability to come to know something of these matters from within. In his latest book, A New World, Strieber encourages his readers to make their own efforts to establish contact and communication with the beings he calls his visitors. He provides guidance in the form of a meditation he has practiced daily for decades. Perhaps most importantly, he describes how his relationship with his visitors has changed from abject fear and terror to one of cooperative communication, facilitated by an implant in his right ear that through which he says he receives information helpful to him in every form of his life, and especially in his professional writing. He expresses the hope that, through expanded communication with his visitors, humanity may make scientific and technological breakthroughs which may help us and the planet survive. Indeed, the title of his book, A New World, is inspired by a statement made by the late Colonel Corso to the effect that humanity's contacts with the technologies being made available to us through such beings represent the possibility of, as he put it, a new world if you can take it. It appears now that, at least in the world of the people who call themselves experiencers rather than abductees or contactees, that the contemporary disclosure movement is coming not from the top down, but from the bottom up, as more and more people once again feel free to talk, as Strieber did, about their own experiences with extraordinary beings, and as we slowly develop the means for having intelligent conversations about these matters. Miguel Mendonca's compilation of first-person statements by people who describe their extraordinary experiences with anomalous beings, entitled "We Are the Disclosure," is, in my opinion, a good example of this movement. So too are the remarkable publications and activities of FREE, the Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial and Extraordinary Experiences, founded by the late astronaut scientist Dr. Edgar Mitchell, and by Dr. Rudy Schild, Mary Wadwell, and Ray Hernandez. I must also mention the work of my teacher, Dr. Sean Esbjorn Hargens, who is pioneering a series of online courses in what he calls exostudies, which provide an extraordinary overview of the now vast literature and complex social and cultural and political dynamics of the UFO phenomenon, as well as his new website, whatsupwithufos.com. All of these people and many others are attempting to create the context in which we can have meaningful, informed conversations about these matters, a desire that I think is very much in accord with the spirit of this conference. While the majority of people whom I've just mentioned happen to be male, it must be said that many of the leading writers and other experiencer voices emerging in our times are of the female gender, writing with an unprecedented degree of candor and insight. With a resurgence of interest in anomalous materials being recovered from crash or donation sites, we're also witnessing the emergence in the work of many authors of two new related concepts under the names of the secret space program and the breakaway civilization. These two terms imply that certain elite groups on Earth are now utilizing in their daily lives very high technologies, not of this Earth, and that indeed they have broken away from the people of the planet's other civilizations, financed by trillions of dollars they have stolen in a variety of clandestine ways. What does anthroposophy have to say in relationship to such ideas and developments? Let us turn to the work of Dr. Stephen E. Usher, very well known in the anthroposophical community as an economist who formerly worked on the staff of the New York Federal Reserve and former publisher of the Anthroposophic Press. Dr. Usher insightfully reviewed the ideas I have been presenting and others related to the UFO phenomenon in his article, Keeley Technology and 8 Related Idea Complexes, published in the spring-summer 2018 issue of the MysTech Journal. In the article, he mentions that he attended 2 conferences under the title Secret Space Program in 2014 and in 2015. It just so happens that I attended the America's Secret Space Program conference that took place in Bastrop, Texas, under that title in 2015. I did not have the pleasure of meeting Dr. Usher, however, until the summer of 2018 when I attended a MysTech gathering at the Waldorf School in Austin, Texas. After our conversation in which we discussed our mutual interests, he sent me a copy of his article, and I was impressed at his depth of knowledge of the field. Most importantly, he introduced his own thoughts about Rudolf Steiner's writings about the 8th sphere, the incarnation of Ahriman, and the etheric Christ and his opponents. I was immediately struck by Dr. Usher's observations because way back in my 20s, when I was considering going to Rudolf Steiner College to become a Waldorf school teacher, I bought the book entitled The Occult Movement in the 19th Century, which contains Steiner's lecture on the eighth sphere. I was very intrigued by Steiner's concern about this sphere, in part because of a friend who had drifted into insanity through her participation in questionable spiritual practices. Dr. Usher says that it was, quote, created by two classes of spiritual beings of considerable capacity that have undergone an irregular and retrograde evolution. These are the spirits of Lucifer and the spirits of Ahriman. In other words, they are, in Steiner's view, the spirits dedicated to leading humanity towards cold-hearted intellectual arrogance on one hand, and abject materialist determinism on the other. The eighth sphere, as I understand it, is a prison for the stolen spiritual and mental substance of humanity. Whether or not one might regard Lucifer and Ahriman as actual beings, it is not hard to see such forces of intellectual arrogance and materialist determinism at work in the life of the mind in our times, particularly in the race toward the creation of artificial intelligence. Referring to the influence of Ahriman, Dr. Usher goes on further to say, when human beings engage in decadent forms of clairvoyance, they have all kinds of experiences. But what is happening as they have these many experiences is that their substance is being sucked into the eighth sphere. Literally, the substantiality of their brains is being stolen away into the eighth sphere and used to create densified imaginations in which people experience all kinds of illusory imaginal experiences in which, to use Steiner's words, the soul takes them for realities, for sense perceptions, when they are not. Usher writes, it is my hunch that a lot of the phenomena experienced in the UFO realm, UFO sightings, alien encounters, etc., are made up of such spectral phenomena. Because the training is not correct, a person mistakenly thinks he is beholding a sense-perceptible event, but very possibly the event is based on the densified imaginations of the eighth sphere. I personally relate to Dr. Usher's comments about the eighth sphere, Lucifer and Ahriman, as I had an extraordinary series of imaginal experiences in the course of my research into Whitley Strieber and his story, some of which I recount in the epilogue to my book. Moreover, Strieber, in a series of conversations at his Greenwich Village apartment in 1987, described to me his visitors, whoever they are, as beings intensely interested in human souls and are involved in their transport after death. I went home and reread Steiner's lecture on the eighth sphere and sent my book to Strieber for him to read the lecture. I am not sure if the book had a direct impact on him, but it is notable that in A New World, he emphasizes that each of us is responsible for the health and strength of our souls, which is our best defense against what he describes as the predatory nature of some of his visitors that he has encountered. The concepts Steiner associated with Ahriman and the eighth sphere disturbed me also because, like many young readers of my post-World War II generation, growing up under the shadow of powerful totalitarian enemies and the threat of nuclear war, I had read both Aldous Huxley's novel Brave New World, written in 1931, and George Orwell's novel 1984, written in 1948, when I was 12 years old. Both novels, as we know, depict not so distant, very grim future worlds in which high technology has been used in immoral ways to enslave the world's population and extinguish our humanity. Both books have remained in print for decades and were accepted widely into many school classrooms in the US and many other countries. I believe they played a major role in awakening the consciences of many young people in my generation who later went on to try to forestall such grim futures by protesting the Vietnam War, organizing Earth Day and anti-nuclear demonstrations out of their concern for the fate of the Earth, and who went on to explore perhaps esoteric spiritual traditions. They certainly impelled me in those directions, and they may well have influenced many of us here today. Unfortunately, Huxley and Orwell are not taught widely in the schools anymore, and so the concept that we may be in danger of losing our humanity is being eclipsed by another big idea which seems to offer humanity a technologically, digitally based platform towards a leap into higher intelligence and the perfection of the human body. I refer, of course, to the idea of the singularity, the point at which machine intelligence and human intelligence would merge, a concept being advocated and advanced by the now famous author and inventor Ray Kurzweil, among others. He joins with quite a plethora of authors in holding that we are moving inevitably toward the state of transhumanism, in which we transcend biology itself. It is a view of the future of human evolution that is reportedly widespread among young people working in information sciences, the tech industry, neuroscience, and the biological sciences. Kurzweil is wildly expansive about the significance of the singularity. He postulates that once artificial intelligence and human intelligence will merge, our combined intelligence will move outward into the universe. We are going to hear much more about this movement toward transhumanism and the dangers of artificial intelligence for humanity during this conference. I mention it here to frame the conclusion to this keynote, for I agree that the very future of humanity is at stake. One of the most important things I learned in the course of my investigation into Whitley Strieber is that we ourselves, exactly as we are constituted with our extraordinary brains, linked to an amazingly sophisticated nervous system, with our interior stars of the 7 chakras, with our capabilities for inner spiritual knowledge allied to our own prodigious capacities for great emotional, physical, and intellectual intelligence, are indeed vast, active, living information systems, to borrow a term coined from the visionary author of science fiction, Philip K. Dick. Dick introduced the idea of the vast, active, living information system in, of course, the novel Valis, in which he posited that humanity had long been in contact with an extraterrestrial intelligence that intervenes to help us at times in our history when our human freedoms and right to self-determination are under threat. The idea of Valis was a result of a mystical vision that transpired early in Dick's married life, in which he experienced the superimposition of 2 time zones. Throughout all of his 20th century adult life, he felt himself to be experiencing 2 lifetimes, one in Berkeley, California, the other in ancient Rome as a secret Christian. He believed his mind had become plugged into Valis. He also believed Valis had transmitted to him information that helped save the life of his young son through an emergency operation. Dick had benefited in many other ways as well as an author, he believed. It is worth noting that many of his novels, though hardly successful in their day, were prophetic of conditions in our own times and have been converted into major motion pictures such as Blade Runner, Minority Report, and Through a Scanner Darkly. I take a lot of inspiration from Dick's concept of Valis because as soon as I decided to undertake my investigation into the life of Whitley Strieber, I began to receive the benefit of many kinds of aid and many intuitive ideas that led me to find rare books, overcome obstacles to obtain necessary interviews with both UFO proponents and skeptics, and led me to new friends who would understand and support my work. In time, it led me to new spiritual teachers in the Western Hermetic tradition and the study of the Tarot and the Holy Kabbalah, to the talking tree of life. I would like to suggest that all of us who commit to the paths we are exploring on this journey will likewise receive vital aid on our way. The fact that we may be confident we will receive aid, however, does not rule out the likelihood that we will experience some significant opposition. And here I return to some of the thoughts articulated by Dr. Usher. I refer specifically to his discussion of the upcoming incarnation of Ahriman, an event foreseen by Dr. Steiner. Dr. Usher states his view that some, quote, humans are possessed by Ahrimanic beings that inspire ideas concerning new technology of a bad type. Advanced mind entrainment techniques and destructive devices like the Nazi Bell come to mind. For those not familiar with the term, the Bell was reportedly an anti-gravity flying weapons platform developed by Nazi scientists through information provided by secret societies claiming contact with extraterrestrial civilizations. Indeed, Dr. Usher points to the earlier work of Dr. Georg Unger, author of the 1958 work, UFOs, Physical and Spiritual Aspects, who suggested that some UFO, alien, and abduction experiences are distortions of the etheric Christ experience. It is an opinion Dr. Usher, in his own unique way, appears to share. He speculates that there may be a plan in the deep state to create a false flag public event in which it appears an alien invasion is underway, in which deep state actors could bring out such flashy toys as their secret space program vehicles, holographic illusions, and other technologies for entraining the public mind and giving the perfect opportunity for Ahriman to incarnate. He is confident, though, that the etheric Christ will indeed begin to appear more frequently around the world, and that we will learn from Ahriman the utter futility of materialism. I have no opinion on whether certain forces will attempt to engineer an alien invasion as an opportunity for Ahriman to incarnate. Regarding his hope for more frequent beneficial apparitions of the etheric Christ, I certainly hope Dr. Usher is right. In conclusion, I wish to suggest 2 lines of thought that I hope will be a benefit to all of us going forward. The first point is that over the past century, the world has witnessed a proliferation of organizations that claim to uphold the highest spiritual truths and advance the evolution of humanity, but in reality have been and continue to be organizations destructive of the human spirit, run by highly narcissistic leaders who, under the guise of phony spiritual practices, bilk their followers out of their money, their youth, their emotional health, and their very sanity. I can speak to such organizations since, as I alluded to earlier, I lost a good friend from college to a mind control cult located in Oakland, California, back in the 1970s. It is important that we speak, therefore, with complete transparency and in the clearest possible language about anthroposophical ideas and activities, for some people may wish to simply dismiss the concerns we share as the irrational preoccupations of just another mind control cult. Lastly, I respectfully suggest we cultivate a healthy openness to listening to new, emerging voices who speak of the future evolution of humanity in other traditions with their own ways of looking at beings of higher or even artificial natures. Tibetan Buddhism is one example, with its many tutelary deities, bodhisattvas, and its stories of tulpas, or intelligent beings created by monks out of thought forms that become independent of their creators. So too do we Westerners understand extraordinarily little of the traditions about the jinn among people of Islamic faiths. People from indigenous traditions, alien to our European and American cultures around the world, have their own ways of understanding and relating to beings with extraordinary capabilities. So I respectfully suggest that in addressing the questions of the dangers posed to humanity by the development and use of immoral technologies, we educate ourselves a bit more about terrestrial cultures that may seem alien to us and resist the temptation to immediately put such stories into an anthroposophical box. In doing so, we may prepare ourselves well to transform, renew, and regenerate ourselves wherever the Spirit may take us. I hear the winds of the sea and the seagulls calling me. The tides are going out and the winds are rising. It is time for us to set sail and for me to head to the bow of our Imram ship so that I might see, I hope, the Isles of the Blessed as they start to arise from the horizon, one by one, as we make our way from speaker to speaker on our upcoming journey. I am honored to have been asked to be here yet once again at the end of our voyage to bid us well on our paths homeward. So until we meet again, please join me in listening with our hearts open to this verse directed to the Holy Guardian Angel in an old Scottish prayer. Be thyself the guiding star above me. Illume thou to me every reef and shoal. Pilot my bark on the crest of the wave to the restful haven of the waveless sea. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed, for that wonderful presentation. What a great start for the conference. Thank you so much for that. Very much appreciate you giving the keynote address, and you really came through. Thank you. Your keynote address points to the fact that there are many different facets to this discussion. The spiritual scientific, the scientific, the subphysical, and the physical, all are pressing upon each of us, and it is the hope of this conference and beyond that we begin to recognize and understand them in a true and correct way. So thank you again, Ed. Ed will be joining us again for closing remarks at the end of the conference, Sunday afternoon. Please do join us for that live if you can. If you would like to message Ed directly, you can do so by using the post section near the bottom of the page and use the @ symbol, then Ed-Conroy. Now I would like to turn things over to our main host of the conference, Andrew Linnell. Andrew is the author of 2 children's books, an art history book, The Hidden Heretic of the Renaissance, Leonardo, which you can find in the recommended book tab below. He is also leads several MysTech study courses and has published 3 MysTech study course guides, which will be available here on this site, mystech.org. Andrew will be giving 2 presentations this conference, one tomorrow afternoon and the other on Sunday afternoon session. Please join him then when there will be a more complete introduction for him. But for right now, Andrew, you have the floor yourself.
Well, thank you, Frank. And Ed, I also want to say thank you so much. That was a wonderful and insightful keynote talk to launch our MysTech 2020 conference. We're now out of our home port and off to sea. You've given us the provisions for our uncharted journey together. As we've heard, we face what may seem like unsurmountable problems ahead. You've placed before us the case for the presence, sometimes unknown, among us, of what may be called beings. Well, let's even call them extraterrestrials. Some have wondered whether they are available to our physical senses or to our spiritual senses or both. Steiner used the term extraterrestrial when referring to what he called the Vulcan beings. Of course, more of this can be found in the MysTech Beginner Study Guidebook, and some of you who are participating in this conference have gone through that study group. But our conference this year is meant to address these contemporary issues, to put them on the table for us to see and to ponder. We will dabble this year on what hopefully future conferences can actually solve, which is leading us to real solutions. Now, I was asked to talk a little bit about conference rules, and I've done conferences that are in person. This is a little different this year. Normally, I would start out by saying, let's all be very civil and be cordial as we're interacting. But we are online. And yet I have found when I witness online conversations that people who normally can be very cordial in public sometimes get more rude when they have the safety and the distance of social media. I think it's also the case, though, that the soul is not restricted by spatial dimensions. And so I think that all of us should try to approach our interactions on this conference with as much warmth and understanding for each other. I'd also like to say that in these comments and online interactions, we'd like to keep all politics out of this conference. I know this is an election year, and of course, that will be tough. As Frank said, our conference offers 20 international speakers, some of whom knew nothing about MysTech when they were invited. Our speakers, our crew, represents a wide spectrum of views dealing with the theme of MysTech. Likely you will not agree with the perspective of some speakers, and that is fine. For our conference this year, we've invited these authors and authorities from many fields, as he introduced them. Their views are their own and do not necessarily match the views of MysTech, but we've selected people that we believe have something important to say. By the way, the board of MysTech itself harbors quite varying views, even in our political views as well. Now, it's been mentioned that we've built recently this conference platform. It's been cobbled together using applications such as Zoom and YouTube, but this is the first time we've deployed it. So there will be kinks, and maybe you've already noticed some. Hopefully we're keeping them out of view, but anyway, your patience and your feedback are important. And I also want to give my gratitude to 3 individuals who've worked extensively to make this happen. And Frank mentioned 2, Byron Linares and Donna Alvarez, but also Frank himself has put in unbelievable hours and had to deal with the stress makers like myself. We do want your feedback. Given that this is our first conference, I'm sure you'll have lots to say. You may send feedback during the conference or after it ends. You can use @Frank in your live chat or afterwards through email to mystech@cfae.us, which stands for the Center for Anthroposophical Endeavors, and then .us. On Saturday, we are going to have a workshop with Dr. Gopi Krishna Vijaya, many of you know him. And he asked me to ask you if you happen to have a prism available to bring it to that workshop. So he's going to be showing and having you do some experiments with him. This schedule is quite intense. I've had some people remark, oh, I couldn't possibly do this. There's too much here. So we are going to be sending to each one of you as participants, look for it each morning, an email about the coming day. For some of you, this may be ending up in your spam folder. It has already, I know for a few. Or maybe if you're using Gmail in a promotions folder or something like this where you don't normally look. We hope all of you can actively participate in each of these sessions, but we know many of you will find it too tiresome to be watching this conference as intensely as it is, according to the schedule that we've set. So although we've scheduled breaks, you might find that you need longer breaks. Perhaps during a break, it would be good to get outdoors, take a brisk walk or something of this nature, or interact with others. I always find it good to get away from the screen at times so that my eyes can see far away and I can soak in sunlight. And we'll talk more about that perhaps in a future conference. So what I'd like to do right now is to peruse our schedule. And so I'm going to share a screen with you that you're seeing right now. And you can see here we are at kickoff, and now I'm going over these rules and overview. And tonight we'll be having Boyd Collins and Doug Smith, and then there's a Q&A afterwards. So while a speaker is talking, we're not going to be taking questions, but you can still ask them in that chat box to the right of your video stream. So, and we will try to capture those questions if you ask them then, or at the end, we can capture more questions and the moderator will ask them during this Q&A session. We switch to tomorrow. And if you notice, we're starting a half hour early. All of these lines here are every 15 minutes. Rosemary McMullen and Daniel Perez will be addressing threefolding that you just heard some about. And then we will go on with this sort of putting on the table all of the issues and challenges that we face. And then Florian Seidel and myself will begin some of the discussion here tomorrow in the late afternoon, and we will carry on Saturday with part 1 and part 2 of MysTech and spiritual science and trying to bring some inner notion to how we can address these problems that we will be putting on the table before. And then in the evening, we'll have Gareth Dicker and Lindsay Cole speaking about resonance and some possibilities for resonance technologies through work of John Worrell Keeley and Schomberger and some others that Gareth will be talking about, and Lindsay will be talking about some recent developments in music. I hope many of you will partake in the mornings with Lynn Stoll leading us in eurythmy. I will have some more to say about eurythmy at the very start of that. And she has promised it will be over before Hugh Lovell begins. And her eurythmy will be about 35 minutes long. So you can see that we will then get into the use of machinery in the world, work that's been done and going on. Dale Pond is with the Sympathetic Vibratory Physics Institute out in Colorado. And I'd mentioned Gopi Krishna Vijay, who's going to lead a workshop on color. And then Florian and myself again. And then in the evening, two doctors, Deb Katchen and Mark Katchen, will be leading us on a lot of questions coming from mythology here. And then Mark looking towards the future on artificial intelligence in particular and the human ego. Finally, on Sunday, after eurythmy, we will be looking at the spiritual beings concerned with machinery and the future mechanical occultism. We will then come to a closing. We will look at the role of MysTech. We are hoping for a lot of participation there on where we can go to make MysTech real in the world and allow it to fulfill the mission that it's taking on. And then we will have our closing ceremony. So I hope you all can join as much of this as possible throughout. Obviously, all these times are Eastern Daylight Time. Eastern Daylight Time is the same as New York's time, in case you're overseas somewhere. So I think what I would also like to say is a quick comment here about why MysTech has selected this time of year for our conference. And it's not merely because summer's the best time for a conference or because all the other bigger institutions have put their conferences here, but actually there's another reason. And it began 5 days ago on August 8th with a cosmic event that began, as it does every year. This is when the Archangel Michael begins to engage the dragon, whose presence in elemental beings has extended halfway to the moon. Michael will drive the dragon out of the atmosphere and back into the earth by October. The sword of Michael is also known as the Perseid meteor shower. Michael's victory comes at a time when nature is fading away, preparing for winter. In the autumn, humanity experiences its separation from dying nature. In human evolution, we are entering our autumn, the autumn of our evolution. It was during the Michaelmas season that Rudolf Steiner gave most of his lectures about technology. It is your conference task to understand this and understand why this season for these talks and conferences about technology. So I would like to read to you a short quote before I stop. And this is from Technology and Art, Their Bearing on Modern Culture. Everybody is obliged to undergo the battle. In its effects, it is experienced by everybody. There would be no greater fallacy than to say we must rebel against what technical science has brought to us in modern life. We must protect ourselves from Ahriman. We must withdraw from this modern life. In a certain respect, such an attitude would be an indication of spiritual cowardice. The real remedy lies not in allowing the forces of the soul to weaken and to withdraw from modern life, but in so strengthening these forces that its pandemonium can be endured. World karma demands a courageous attitude to modern life, and that is why genuine spiritual science calls at the very outset for effort, really strenuous effort on the part of the human soul. So now we have come to our dinner break. Well, dinner, that is, for those of us here on the East Coast, perhaps lunch for others, or breakfast for even others. But we hope to see you all. And well, it's going to be, I had here 90 minutes. We are about 5:10 in the afternoon, and we will start, I believe, this evening. And let me bring it back up here at 7:30. So we will see you then at that time. Thank you all. And back to you, Frank, if you have any further things to say.
Thank you, Andrew. No, this is, we'll just make this the end of this session, and we're looking forward to having you all back in the evening session, which is going to be in a couple of hours. So thank you all again, and we'll see you in a couple hours. Take care.